I believe that I am the god of the game. That I have that when my spiritual awakening happened, I realized that I wasn't just the main character of my video game, but I'm also the game designer. And that pleasure is a technology that tells me exactly how to win the game. Like at its highest, like on mythic mode, I have discovered like this is the achievement. Like this is the cheat code.
Enjoy this Wild Soul Gathering production. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie. Pour yourself a really tall glass of spiritual curiosity and join me for the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. In the spirit of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life. Hi, I'm Dr. Sandra Marie, your host for today's show. Today, we're exploring a topic that often sits at the edge of spiritual conversation, pleasure, embodiment, and the intelligence of the body. My guest, Sharon Marie Scott, is an erotic mystic and author whose work invites people to re-examine desire not as distraction, but as a doorway to consciousness, sovereignty, and creative power. This conversation isn't about pushing boundaries for the sake of intensity. It's about curiosity, discernment, and what it means to integrate pleasure and spirituality in a way that's grounded, ethical, and truly embodied. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and have this conversation with you today. So thank you for saying yes.
Absolutely. Well, I'm truly grateful to have you here today to discuss a topic that feels very relevant, but many times excluded from formats, focusing in that spiritual curiosity realm. We'll be unpacking a lot in today's conversation, but before we go deeper and delve into your book, Forbidden Alchemy, Transmuting Taboo into Erotic Medicine, for listeners who are meeting you for the first time, how would you describe the heart of your work?
Yeah. The heart of my work is around the pursuit of spiritual mastery, but through pleasure. And by pleasure, I mean aliveness. I mean, that's the heart of the work. So spiritual mastery, so people who are on a path of spiritual expansion and awakening, and that they understand the potency of doing that through pleasure and aliveness.
Okay, so as we're getting started, just for someone who's spiritually curious but a little unsure where pleasure fits into their spiritual life, what would you want them to know before they listen further?
Yeah, I'd want them to know that their erotic body or their pursuit of pleasure is the pursuit of their spiritual expansion. Like they're literally the same. Like this is where I feel like we have gone and diverged in the paths that we were meant to diverge on. Like I call myself an erotic mystic, and that means that I experience the divine through my body, through pleasure, through aliveness. And that includes erotic pleasure and bedroom play and things that I'm sure we'll talk about. But it's not exclusive. It's not mutually exclusive of just the idea of aliveness and beauty and other things that we find pleasure in. So for me, the conversation is all about how deeply attuned are we with our pleasure when it comes to our spirituality. So for me, they are intrinsically connected rather than separate things. In fact, you can't have one without the other. And if you try to, you are cutting yourself off from the potentiality of the heights of spirituality that you can reach, and certainly the heights of pleasure that you can reach.
Well, thank you for framing that, and I think that'll give people an idea of what we're going to get into as we're talking. So in your work, you describe pleasure as the body's divine language, like you just said. How do people learn to
Yeah.
listen to that language without confusing pleasure with impulse or avoidance?
For me, the difference is this. There's a difference between pleasure and a relief of suffering. So we have like this real obsession right now, and rightfully so, with shadow work. It's a really potent and powerful healing modality.
Yeah.
But shadow work really is the pursuit of the relief of suffering. And the relief, while it feels relieving, there's a feeling of what our mind might interpret as pleasure, but it's not actually pleasure. And so we can when we get on this sort of shadow work hamster wheel, we can get caught up in the pattern of relief, 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 and constantly feeling like we need to heal something, that we're not somehow complete or whole or perfectly divine, even in the process of healing ourselves, when in fact we're actually whole and healing all the time. We are perfect and whole all the time. So shadow work to me so I'm stretching and trying to introduce to people the transcendent evolution. What's the next evolution of shadow work? It's pleasure alchemy. It's erotic alchemy.
Okay. Okay. I think that that was very meaningful.
So for me, pleasure is a technology. And I come from a history of being a writer and creator in comic books and video games. And so my video game experience actually gives me a really unique narrative to look through, like my own reality through, which is I believe that I am the god of the game. That I have that when my spiritual awakening happened, I realized that I wasn't just the main character of my video game, but I'm also the game designer, and that pleasure is a technology that tells me exactly how to win the game. Like at its highest, like on mythic mode, I have discovered like this is the achievement. Like this is the cheat code. So I am the god of the game. My body is the console. And again, not only in the context of erotic pleasure, but certainly includes that. But my body is the oracle. It tells me yes or no. It tells me what direction to move in. It tells me if I am always choosing between two things, and I always pick the one that brings me more aliveness, more pleasure, then I believe it will continue to expand my consciousness. It will unlock my dharma if I don't already know what that is, and it will call in my highest timeline. So for me, pleasure is like the answer to everything. And again, pleasure meaning what makes me feel the most alive.
Great. I love that explanation. So let's talk a little bit about pleasure literacy
Hmm.
as the missing skill.
Yeah,
So we're in a world shaped by stress, trauma, overstimulation. What does ethical pleasure literacy look like? I
yeah.
think
It's mhm.
that's a big missing piece is the pleasure literacy.
Yeah, and the first part of literacy is what I just explained, just understanding. Like I'm leading a global movement called the Pleasure Renaissance. And that is all about restoring eros and pleasure, meaning aliveness, as the lens through which we live and thrive in our lives. Instead of this like conditioned, long time conditioned way of looking through life at like through survival and through competition. And that when we do that, we unlock everything that's meant for us. But we have been conditioned in this, like, not just this patriarchal society, which we can all talk about, but in this way of feeling like we have to be in constant competition with each other. But when you realize that your body is the console, so besides like pleasure being the framework through which we're supposed to live and thrive through our life, but like actually learning the vernacular of how our body speaks to us. Like that's the deeper level of pleasure literacy. Your body, I like to call it like your body as oracle. Your body will tell you what's the next direction I need to go in. What's my dharma? What's my next choice? Like your body will tell you. Body has the answer to that
I
question.
agree with you. There's a lot out there right now on intuition. It's a big topic, just like the shadow work. And intuition is all about using your body as an oracle. So Sharon, how do you go about guiding people in their expanding capacity for sensation and aliveness without overwhelming the nervous system? How are you working with other people with this?
Yeah, I love this question so much because I used to focus on, what was my capacity for holding hard emotions, because that was like the shadow work again. It was like my pursuit of the shadow work was, can I hold myself in the emotions of fear or overwhelm or, all the things that my childhood traumas were bringing to me? Could I hold that at that threshold that my nervous system didn't collapse within that window of tolerance? And if I did, then I healed something and I expanded. And that was true. Like that was the hamster wheel of the shadow work. But what I've discovered and what my dharma, spiritual mastery through pleasure, really speaks to, and the pleasure literacy, which is about what's my pleasure threshold? Like, what is the edge of my pleasure rather than the edge of my nervous system with regards to things that are hard to hold? What's the pleasure threshold, which actually has its own, like, kind of hard to hold threshold? Like, what's my pleasure threshold? How much pleasure can I allow myself to receive? Because even like in like really practical terms, like when someone discovers their G spot for the first time, it's
Mhm.
kind of an overwhelming sensation. It's like you're not sure if it's a pleasurable sensation or not. It's just a lot of
Mhm.
sensation. And you're like, I don't know if I like this or not. But if you stick with it long enough and if you kind of like romance it and you get to know your body, you know, you find that that sensation changes or your story to that sensation changes. And so one of the ways that I recommend to especially femme-bodied persons is to I have a date night, a goddess night at least every week. At least once a week I have a goddess night with myself. And so I shower and cleanse my body, I rub oil on my body, I dress for myself, I cook or I take myself out. And then after that dinner, and I fully engage in all the senses in that dinner because I food is a particularly sensual experience for me. And then when I get home, like I dim the lights and I turn music on and maybe I do breath work. Sometimes I do add to my own experience by getting in some sort of altered state. And then I undress in front of the mirror and I say beautiful things to myself. And I I get to know how my body responds to the water that runs down it or the food that I'm consuming or me rubbing it with oil or the way that I look at myself or talk to myself in the mirror. So it's about, again, back to pleasure literacy, like getting to know the vernacular of how your body responds to you and how it responds to pleasure.
So you had mentioned the story that you tell yourself that changes. So can we
Yeah.
sit with that a little bit? Is that plays into your goddess night?
It absolutely does because an obvious example is like I had a massage. I had a a beautiful date with a beautiful person, and he offered me massage, and so I was a yes to that. I love being touched, and in the middle of that massage somewhere, he was massaging my calves, and he's a strong individual, and he was gripping my calves in such a way that I was like right on this pain pleasure edge on my calves, and I remember, as a person who's been in the kink community for quite a long time and been a leader and educator in that community, I know my masochist pretty well. And I know that what some people call pain to my body is simply interpreted as intense sensation. And that I can actually play with the story of whether it's pain and whether it's pleasure. And so I actually actively play with those words and how my body responds to those words. So in the middle of this massage, right at that edge of, gosh, this is just super intense sensation, I actually was actively playing with like, what if I called this pleasure? And that flooded me with a certain set of sensations. And what if I played with the story of pain? What if I called it pain? And there was this nuanced but marked difference in the set of sensations that I was
Interesting.
experiencing. Yeah, between pain and pleasure. And what I really played with was because when I first was toying with it in that moment of the massage, the two sensational experiences collectively were quite different. There was a kind of a marked difference. So then I started to play with how close could I make them? How subtle could I make the two differences? Could I make them so that pain and pleasure had no meaning? I didn't quite get there. There was like it was a really small margin that I couldn't quite like fully merge, and I found that fascinating too. The experiments with the body
That
and pleasure literacy are so much fun.
that is really interesting, and I'm guessing you're gonna continue to play with that one a little bit.
Oh yeah,
It seems to
yeah,
have intrigued you. So your work speaks to devotion and surrender. So Sharon, how do you help people stay sovereign, especially in places that carry strong erotic or spiritual charge? Because they can be interchangeable, I think.
yeah. I love what you said, erotic and spiritual charge. Like most people don't put those two things in the same sentence. And I think that keeping your sovereignty, maintaining your sovereignty has to do with first, like keeping your lens pulled back enough to be the observer of what's happening, right? So if we are not requiring our lens to be the aperture of the lens through which we look at ourselves from within, like let's say the interoception. Like if we're not keeping our camera pulled back wide enough, then we are the wounded self that's coming through, or we are the child self that's like searching for that abandonment wound to be healed or something. And so like in the context of like kink, let's say it's a scene between a dominant and submissive, and I'm choosing to be submissive in the scene. What I had to come to realize is that that I was searching for this submission because of some unmet wound, unmet need and wound that I was carrying from childhood, often about like abandonment and an unworthiness. But that I was less the fully adult integrated me in those moments that I was participating in that scene. And I was more the 5 and 6-year-old who was really searching for the unmet need underneath that abandonment wound. And if we don't know that, then we are behaving from the point of view of the 5 and 6-year-old. And so like that's the knowledge of that. That doesn't mean I don't sometimes still slip into the 5 or 6-year-old occasionally, and I am 5 and 6. And so I don't have necessarily I don't have a degree of sovereignty that makes me fully sovereign over myself. But just the awareness that when I'm in submission, especially, and certain people will trigger it more than others, that I need to look at whether I'm coming to that moment as a fully integrated adult me with a full no, for example, or not, or some degree of less than that.
Oh, that's really powerful awareness in that, and I'm sure that that's just been its own journey on itself.
Yeah, yes. And a lot of the book that came out last month, Forbidden Alchemy, which is all about transmuting the taboo into medicine, is really about that. And like people don't in my local king community here in San Diego, like they don't like to be called out on the fact that like when you're coming from submission or from the side of, let's say, the bottom or the one who's under someone's authority, that you have to know what your bottom line is, that you have to know what your deal breakers are, and you have to have boundaries. And again, their 5 and 6-year-old tends to panic at the thought that they can't just give it to someone else and be held in that space. And I now really empathize with it because I know it from that side too. When I first came into the community and was looking for that myself and looking to just outsource it to a dominant, for example, and then had to
Okay.
reclaim that. Yeah.
That's quite a journey. Let's shift a little bit.
Mhm.
Many people have powerful openings through their embodiment or erotic practice. What helps someone integrate those experiences into their daily life rather than constantly seeking the next peak? How do you translate that versus
Yeah.
chasing?
Yeah. And I have to say, like, I don't even mean to be actually bringing the book up because I know it will come up naturally, but here is a natural place for it to come up because
Perfect.
there are post chapter exercises that are super mild that deal with this precisely. It's like, here's the broader concept of what you're looking for when you find yourself attracted to primal play, or when you find yourself attracted to power exchange. Here's the relationship to yourself that you first have to have a conversation around before you even bother to talk about it with someone else or to engage in a scene with someone else. So, and I also believe that pleasure is also an integration tool. So I believe pleasure is a healing modality. It's a compass, like it's a technology, everything we talked about, but I believe it's also an integration tool. So even after, let's say you do a scene with somebody, you can use pleasure, self-pleasuring and pleasure. There's a concept called drop. I don't know, how familiar your audience might be with that, but in the kink community, and it's kind of like with psychedelics too. Like if you're doing plant medicine, within say 72 hours of that plant medicine journey, you'll find yourself maybe your nervous system kind of tanks, right? It's been taken to an edge and then it kind of collapses within a few days, and you have to you feel tired or irritable, and you have to kind of let yourself recover from that drop. That's what happens in the kink community too. So when you're holding yourself at an edge, and again, like, you need to be conscious that you are playing with your edge, and that sitting at your edge for a length of time, we know about the window of tolerance and polyvagal theory. Like, we know that it's challenging to the nervous system, and that we have to be really kind to ourselves. So again, for me, the first answer to all your questions is the awareness that you're dealing with stuff, and that you're probably coming to those moments from a less than fully integrated adult self. So again, you are negotiating with your own entangled or wounded self as you come to those scenes. And so just that awareness, and that's not to say that you can't make mistakes or suddenly fall into the 5 and 6 year old, and that can be just fine. You have to trust the people that you're with. You have to not blame them if something goes wrong. You have to know that you don't even know what your own edges are. And you have to really come to it with a sense of like conscious participation and patience and the assumption that everybody has everybody else's best interests in mind, and you included, with your own best interests, and that you can make mistakes. And I'll tell you, there have been more stories about me finding my edge or finding where my boundary was by crossing it than ever not doing that, not doing it that way. I found it much more by finding, oh, there it was right behind me.
That actually makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So
And that you have to be kind.
communication is huge, and
Yeah. And
kindness,
kind.
yeah,
Communication with yourself as much as anyone else, and kindness to yourself
absolutely.
as much as anybody else. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about integration. You mentioned that a couple of times just now. Let's unpack a little bit about when initiation meets integration. Your work
Um,
carries strong initiatory energy. What support do you see people needing after that initiation when the ceremony ends and life continues?
God, what a deep and beautiful question. I think I think because I come to all of this from a point of view of sacrament, like even as I participate, in the same way that like I might participate in a guided group plant medicine journey, I treat kink and I treat the bedroom in the same way. Like I believe that, anything can be a drug and anything can be sacrament. So if someone is approaching their journey, even if it's not like about healing, but it's about just learning themselves, if they're treating each of those interactions like sacred interaction,
That's a key.
that's where I'm coming from in terms like, so even if the scene goes completely wrong or you get triggered and go off in a direction that you'd never expected, that's perfect too. And just being really like self-loving in the journey. And then the more self-loving you'll be, the more loving you'll be with the people with you, and vice versa. The more loving you are with them, the more self-loving you'll be with yourself. So for me, the journey is the continued self-compassion and treating the self as sacred, and then being super loving and falling in love with yourself over and over and a deeper level over and over again.
Beautiful, truly beautiful. Tell me more about the true bank of abundance. How does that idea change the way people relate to wealth, productivity, and work?
Yeah, I believe that your capacity to hold sensation, especially pleasure, is tantamount to your ability to hold wealth, love, success, abundance.
Okay.
So, because if you can't take a compliment, if you are deflecting compliments, you also are also blocking your access to wealth and love and prosperity. So again, rather than approaching it from the side of the shadow of like, what are the things I need to avoid, but instead approaching it from the point of view of pleasure, how much can I receive? For me, that again is like the absolute breakthrough. It's a breakthrough. It's a quantum leap forward in your journey when you start saying, how can I orient my life toward pleasure instead of avoiding pain?
That's a big shift.
It is. It's such a
That's a
big
huge
shift.
shift for especially for
Right.
our world and society.
Right. That's the pleasure renaissance, right? So we have to change the cultural narrative. The current narrative is that spirituality and sexuality don't belong in the same place, in the same space, and that
Right.
pleasure is an indulgence or a reward. And we have lived by those narratives for so long, they've become these like cultural operating systems or these frameworks. And
Yep.
such that we have built governmental hierarchies and social systems that uphold those beliefs. So if we change the framework, which is like part of this conversation, is doing that. My goal and the goal of the pleasure renaissance is at the very baseline is to change the cultural narrative so that the culture itself changes and we build new systems.
Okay, so let's take that a step further. The movement. This is like you've dedicated yourself to this movement. So, Sharon, you're actively shaping new cultural myths around pleasure and sovereignty. What responsibility comes with myth making, especially when working with desire and power?
Yeah.
Because there's responsibility with that shift.
Yeah, I agree with that. But the responsibility is really to the self. And I think that the nuance I think that you're pulling at the thread of is whether we are operating from this separation consciousness or from this like victim victimizer consciousness, because some people will ask me the question and it's from clearly from the point of view of the victim victimizer consciousness, again, like that cultural narrative that pleasure should somehow be separate of what we should be doing with our everyday lives, when I think that we are gods at play in this video game and we are meant to be gods at play. We are meant to be looking through the lens of our own pleasure, and our desires are like the map. Like your especially your hidden desires, right? Like your taboo desires, like those are the most telling of where your life is probably meant to go. They're secret. They're these like secret unlocks, like these achievements, these secret achievements in your game level that you're meant to unlock because your desires have meaning, and
Okay, so the
they're probably a path like a movie character, like your hero's journey that you're meant to go on. Whatever you're keeping secret is probably your hero's journey.
okay, so the answer comes from where the question's asked. Hmm.
And what arouses you?
Yeah. So for someone who feels intrigued by that, but also cautious or intimidated by erotic spiritual language, where's a gentle, grounded place for them to begin?
For those who are afraid of the erotic spiritual language. So maybe more secular, is that where your question's coming from?
I think that it's both secular and it's personal. You
I
know,
I and I
wherever
think
that wound and that baggage comes from really holds people back.
it's simpler, I think. It's simpler than even I wanted to originally answer your question, which is if you can tune into like just something that arouses you. And for me, everything is erotic arousal to me because I let it be. But it's not always stimulated by something specifically erotic. I can literally look at a sunset and feel erotically aroused. I can literally have a great meal and be so tuned in to the multi-layered sensation of the meal that I become erotically aroused. Like that has nothing to do with me talking specifically about spirituality and sexuality. It just is the experience because I allow the experience to be that way. So if people could really tune in, like let's say to the body sensations that happen when they're aroused by something, like they could think of something that turns them on. Again, doesn't even have to be sexual. It could be a creative idea that they want to pursue. Like that can be arousing to them. And like there's a set of body sensations that happen when you're aroused. And like when I had writer's block, when I was a writer of comic books and video games way back when, and I had writer's block, I would self pleasure, but not finish, like not bring it to climax. So I would stimulate and then raise my vibration into arousal and erotic arousal, and then I would go back to the laptop, and it would unlock all the blocks would be cleared because pleasure literally changes your perception of the way you're experiencing life around you. So, that again, you don't need to use spiritual language to have that embodied experience.
Well, that makes I mean, when I'm listening to you talk, it really truly is just being 100% present in the moment.
Yeah. For me, it is. And
It's
that
just
presence is the spirituality for me. Like that's the divine connection.
okay. Well, so we talked a little bit about the movement, and I know that that's something at the forefront for you. Tell me a little bit about the book. Why the book, and what can people expect from the book?
Yeah. So forbidden alchemy is a form of the myth making. So like you mentioned the pillars of the pleasure renaissance, pleasure literacy being the first. The second one is erotic alchemy, which is like the kind of the easiest and sexiest to talk about because that's really about sex magic. But people think that sex magic is just about like holding a vision and then like orgasming to the vision, which like if you think that's all there is to sex magic, you are working at like 30% of your god power. Like there's so much more to it than that. So, but pleasure literacy, erotic alchemy. The third one would be what I call sensual aliveness. So what we've talked about, like creating a situation where you have an orgasmic meal is absolutely possible. It's just how much presence are you willing to bring, and how open can you turn your sensational apertures to experiencing every level of everything that's around you, sight, scent, you know smell, taste. How much can you tune into all of those sensations at once? That's sensual aliveness. The fourth one is regenerative community. So how can I contribute to community in such a way that it not only does it not take from the environment and sustainability and the community itself, but how can my participating in it within it give back in such a way that the whole community benefits from it? And again, pleasure and erotic aliveness for me is absolutely an answer to that. And then the last one being myth making, which you mentioned. So because I have this history of a background in animation, comic books, video games, film, and fiction, like I'm gonna start meeting with these media makers and like, what is the legacy that we're leaving behind for the generations that come behind us? Like I'm 54, so I'm a crone in terms of like the phase of life that I'm in. But like we have these outdated visions or these outdated uh ideas of what these archetypes really mean. Like the maiden mother crone archetype has been completely de-eroticized. And about a year ago I wrote an article that re-eroticized the maiden, re-eroticized the mother, and re-eroticized the crone. Like I want to give people like a different vision of what it is to be 60 and sexually at their peak. And so for me, that's myth making too, because that's part of the legacy I'm leaving behind. I'm showing people that, there's no shriveling up. There's no hag or witch that happens at the crone stage. Like we are, we are the wise women, the sexy fucking wise women that you want to be learning from if you haven't already, crossed these thresholds with your erotic self. So it's a big vision. And I'm not necessarily qualified to execute every portion of the global movement itself. It includes female genital mutilation and hopefully child marriage as well. And I just made a connection recently with somebody who has done work in human rights for science, and has worked with the international courts. And he says that there's an argument to be made for human rights for pleasure. And so we're going to meet again to go deeper on those global initiatives as well. So I'm tackling it from all of these different point of views, but in the hopes that like 100 years from now, taboo, like forbidden alchemy and these books, it's a 6-book codex, the first of which is Forbidden Alchemy. The second one comes out in February, which is called Flesh and Flame: Pleasure as the Portal to Divine Mastery, which again is about spiritual mastery through pleasure. But that it's the first 2 books in a larger codex that I think will be referenced 100 years from now around this idea of changing the cultural narrative and pulling our society into an age of pleasure, an age of the pleasure renaissance.
Well, I'm all in for that. I'm gonna guess that most people listening to this are gonna go, "Wow, I never even thought to think about it from that aspect." So there's been a lot of stimulation here just in the process of thinking and seeing this picture way beyond those types of boundaries. But you touched on community. Can we go back to community, and can you just talk a little bit more about community and how you envision that?
Yeah. Regenerative community is one of the pillars of the pleasure renaissance. And I think that we are all collectively exhausted by community that is competitive and comparing, and a community that asks us to conform instead of allowing us to be fully expressed. So for me, I'm a community builder. I've been a community builder for as long as I can remember. And, it's like all I want is to be in community where I can feel fully expressed. And that doesn't mean you have to do what I do or even believe what I believe, but that you allow me to be all of myself without asking me to be less than that. That would
Okay.
be my take on community.
I
Because
like that.
my full expression shouldn't
Sorry,
threaten.
I'm having trouble understanding right now. Please try a little later.
Awesome.
Really? Really, Alexa?
See, she's wanting to like suppress my full expression.
Absolutely. And that is like never happened before.
That's hilarious.
I
But
don't even
again,
think
like,
I'm going to edit that out. That is just too
yeah,
crazy to
yes.
me.
But my full expression shouldn't threaten your existence. If it does, that's
No,
not my
absolutely
work.
not.
It's not my work to be less than me. It's
Yeah.
your work to say, why is that stretching me? Why is that threatening me? And gosh, I'm happy to hold your hand while
Yeah,
you move
100%.
through that stretch.
Oh. So for someone who wants to jump on the movement, be part of it, support it, who wants to work with you, how
Yeah.
do they connect with you? What does that look like? Tell me more about that.
Yeah. The best, most direct way to actually get involved in the pleasure renaissance, which I'm actually putting into like the little actual pieces right now where I have a questionnaire. It's like, how do you want to participate? Do you want to just spread the word? Do you want to bring funding? Do you want to connect me to funders? Because I'm going to need all of those things, right? This is over my pay grade in terms of what I grew up doing, but I am fully capable of leading the movement and then coordinating with these leaders that want to help. So my website, SharonMarieScott.com, would be the first, easiest, and most like logical place to start and get on my newsletter. And then I'm going to be putting up something on my website soon about specifically if you want to participate in the pleasure renaissance. I'm also on other social media. Certainly you can find me on Substack, Sharon Marie Scott, or Life Turned On. That's my platform. So you'll find me on IG, Sharon Life Turned On, or TikTok and YouTube at Life Turned On. I also have a private Facebook group called Life Turned On, and you can find me on Facebook, Sharon Marie Scott.
Okay, thank you. I'll make sure I get that all shared. And how do people get your book?
Yeah, right now, it's on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and you search for Forbidden Alchemy, there are a couple of fiction books that also have that name. But once you see the subtitle of Taboo, you'll know that it's me, and it has this gray scale like St. Andrew's cross kind of in the background on the cover. So you'll find it that way.
Very cool. So any last thoughts or messages you want to leave for the people listening to this?
That I go back to the quantum leap. It is a quantum leap to go from shadow work and a relief of suffering, and then your nervous system starts to just look for more ways to just be in relief. That's one way to live. Or or you do the quantum upgrade, which is I'm going to pursue my pleasures. And my shadows will all come up. It's part of the process of once I pursue my pleasures, anything that's not that vision has to come up for release. So your shadows will come up anyway. So shadow work tools are important, but to live your life through the lens of this shadow work or kind of never feeling complete is a way to get stuck in a loop that never helps you reach your full, not just your full potential in life, but like your full capacity for joy in life. And that pleasure is the answer to everything. Aliveness is the answer to everything.
I'm fully on board with that. And I think that there's a lot of loops out there. And I especially think that there's a lot of loops out there that people are stuck in the spiritual community. With the spiritual offerings out there, I think that, folks need to pay attention. It's a $10 billion industry. So, using some discernment and
Yeah,
using
and
your body
because
as an
they're
oracle
also
is
trying to make
important.
businesses. Yeah, they're also trying to make businesses, and that's you have to feel again. Your body, as the oracle, will tell you, is this the right spiritual leader for me to follow?
Absolutely.
If you feel
Absolutely.
contracted, it's a no.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. Sharon, thank you for, wow, a very enlightening conversation. And I'd like to thank all the listeners out there for joining us today. Spiritual curiosity doesn't ask us to adopt new identities. It really just asks us to stay present, which Sharon, you really embodied a lot in this conversation. So it's being present, honest, embodied as we explore, I think, what truly brings us alive. Thank you very much. Until
Yeah,
next
so
time,
happy.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wild Soul Gatherings Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. To learn more about our guests, please go to our website, wildsoulsgathering.com. We're very eager to hear from our listeners what you thought of the episode, topics you might like us to cover in the future, your thoughts on spirituality, questions you may have. Please feel free to send us an email at wildsoulsgathering@gmail.com. This is your host, Dr. Sandra Marie, sending each of you peace and love. Until we meet again, embrace your wild soul.